Hey guys, how's it going today? So today's video is going to be on really simply what is microeconomics and what is macroeconomics. Okay, so when you go to business school, you have to study economics, you have to study finance. Now the two are very interrelated. Most things on this channel I deal with are in respect to finance, right? But finance is related to economics. Now, there's basic economics, and this is basically what I'm going to give you right now. It's just a basic explanation of what micro and macroeconomics is. But in my opinion, economics, especially the models and the assumptions that are made by these models that economists develop, aren't very accurate, and they're just basically just models. But I'm going to get into that right here. But it's very useful to understand what the terms mean. So when somebody's referring to something in a microeconomic standpoint or a macroeconomic standpoint. So the first one is microeconomics. So what this is dealing with the economics of basically the individual and corporations or small businesses. So this is why I have Apple up on the screen here. So it's basically trying to explain how individual consumers, we'll use this in the confines of Apple here, buying, selling, let's just say one segment of their business, which is probably going to become smaller in the future when we see services and stuff growing so much with Apple. But the iPhone, we'll talk about the iPhone. So, how Apple's pricing strategy affects consumer demand, how consumers' spending habits can relate to Apple, and vice versa. So, basically, the easiest way to describe, the whole theory as a whole is supply and demand. And I'm sure you guys have heard this before. So if you haven't seen this chart before, these can get infinitely more complex. But in my opinion, as they get more complex, they become even more useless. They're just the basic idea is what is important with supply and demand. So on this axis here, you have price. And over here, you have quantity, right? So this is what they call, if you've ever heard of it, the demand curve, going down here, and then the supply curve. So let's use this as an example. We'll start up here at this price. So say we're talking iPhones, like I said. So say this is 1,000. Excuse my writing here. This is difficult to do on here. So $1,000 price tag, right? So I'll just draw a line here so you guys can see this. So basically what this theory says, and it's not really a theory, it's proven, but it's only proven in the confines of everything else remaining constant, which we know is not the case. So they always say all things remaining equal. But the problem with the economy as a whole and consumer habits is they're not equal, they're not static, right? But you can understand what I'm saying once we go here. So at this price, $1,000, the demand is this amount of units. So it doesn't really matter what it is. Let's say it's 5 units, which is going to be more like 5 million, but okay. So 5 units at $1,000. So you can see how that works. We have this right here. Okay. But at $1,000, Apple is willing to supply, let's say, 500. These numbers don't have to be accurate, right? That doesn't even look like a 5, but 500. Okay, so basically what happens here is that the price is so high that Apple is willing to, let me fix that. Apple is willing to supply way more than what is actually demanded. So demand is greater than supply. So basically what happens is the price falls because there's so much supply. So basically it comes down on both sides here, and I'm going to try to make this kind of not too messy. And as it falls, it goes along every line of this. We could keep going. You could say $900, $800, blah, 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 right? Until we get to this equilibrium, and that's what we always hear about, where price equals quantity demanded. Now let's look at the inverse here. So say we're going to go at the price of, we'll go right here. Let's say at the price of $200. So that's 200. So at the price of $200, we'll draw a line. At the price of $200, we'll say that's about the same there. Apple's willing to supply 5. We'll say this is lines up here. Apple's willing to supply 5. However, at $200 demand, this is consumers, so sorry that line there. This is consumers, the demand line is consumers. They are willing to purchase 500 of them, right? So because the price is so low, there's going to be more quantity demanded. So basically, the exact opposite happens here, because there's not enough supply, meaning it's limited supply. The price pressure will go up and up and up until we reach that equilibrium, and that's basically like I've explained. That's where price equals the quantity demanded. So this is how pricing strategies work. How when the economists look at what Apple might sell for what price, this is what they're looking for. They're looking for that equilibrium where price meets quantity demanded, because in either case you're not in equilibrium. If you're above it, you're not in equilibrium. If you're below it, you're not in equilibrium. And those cases will always work themselves out till you get to that equilibrium price. So I hope that makes sense. I mean, this can be very confusing. It was very confusing for me when I first started learning it, but it's not important to really understand too much about it. Just understand the concept so we know what we're talking about. We're talking about microeconomics. We're talking about demand being consumers buying iPhones, supply being Apple supplying them. And I'm sure you've heard of some of these terminology before. It also gets more complex because we can actually have shifts in these. So if I get rid of all this that we did here to make it a little bit easier to see, then there's other factors that come into play. So basically, say it's cooler to have an iPhone, the demand curve here will actually shift, like it will shift up. So this is just another microeconomic model that is built. So when the demand goes up, the price, as you can see, we have a new equilibrium where the price is higher and the quantity as well. Conversely, it can go the other way too. Say, we look at a macroeconomic factor, which I'm going to talk about soon here. Consumers don't have as much money, and as a whole, the demand will decrease, the price will go down as well. Additionally, supply can change as well. So say that the inputs to make the iPhone become easier, more available, cheaper, the supply will increase. So when we have more supply there, the price will drop. And conversely, say the inputs become more expensive, then supply goes this way. That's a shift leftward in the supply curve, so we have less quantity and the price goes up there. There can also be shifts along the curves, like this is basically for the specific price of the good, the demand, so it goes along the curve rather than the shift. And same, it's similar with supply as well, but there's no sense confusing yourself with that. I just wanted to explain the basics of microeconomics, and that's basically it. There's a lot more, like I said, but there's no sense going into it and confusing everyone. So that's Apple as a whole and its consumers. So what is macroeconomics? Well, macroeconomics, as you might have guessed, is the economy as a whole. And there's models and assumptions that are made as well with that, but they're mainly bigger things. So like GDP, like the gross domestic product. So all the goods and services in the United States, these are economic factors. As a whole, the unemployment rate. I'm sure you've heard of all these different things. So macroeconomic factors could also affect the microeconomic, meaning, say the interest rate can affect many things. Say the interest rate goes up a huge amount, say a massive amount. So people that have money in the bank now are making more money off their money, right? Also, stocks become less attractive in that case because, well, why would I take a risk on Apple or some other company, maybe only getting 10% a year on average or something like that? I mean, I think Apple will do better than that over the next period, but that's irrelevant. But say on average, the stock market as a whole, we talked about exchange traded funds. Why would you risk that when you're getting 15% in the bank, right? So that can affect businesses, and then also people can spend less. So, unemployment is higher. We saw another one here, unemployment rate. So people don't have money to buy, and so you can see how the two are interrelated, right? So that's just the basics. I just wanted to give you a basic understanding what microeconomics, and macroeconomics. And I hope I didn't go too much into detail in the microeconomics because it's just basically important to understand what it is and how it differs from macro. Because like I said, I have a degree in finance and I really don't think about these specific charts or anything like that. For the most part, they are not very indicative of anything. It's just important to understand how it works, generally speaking. But I think a lot of people understand the supply-demand relationship just intuitively anyway, right? So if you guys have any questions, leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. And I always love hearing comments down below from you guys. So that's going to be it for today, and I will see you guys in the next one.